Good evening, welcome. I'm Rose, a bookseller at Literati Bookstore. We're pleased to welcome Lisabeth Posthuma to our At Home with Literati series in support of Baby and Solo. She'll be joined in conversation by David Arnold. Just a quick webinar overview for our attendees. The chat is closed, but you may want to keep the chat window open during the event, as I will be dropping links to purchase Baby and Solo from Literati throughout the event. You can also use the Q&A feature on your toolbar to submit questions at any time, and I will ask a selection at the conclusion of their conversation. A reminder, you can also shop for more books at literatibookstore.com for curbside pickup if you live in Southeast Michigan, or to have shipped to you at your home anywhere in the United States. In lieu of a book purchase, we'd also ask that you consider a $5 donation to sustain our virtual programming. Whether you'd like to think of it as this week's, this month, or this year's subscription to our programming, you can make donations at literatibookstore.com/donation. Otherwise, we simply thank you for your attendance this evening, or this morning, or this afternoon, depending on where in the world you may be joining us. Now, allow me to introduce tonight's author and our moderator. Lisabeth Posthuma is a devotee of obscure documentaries about drive-ins, a lover of rotary telephones, and a trophy-winning champion of TV trivia. She lives in Michigan with her two parakeets, Tiki Bon Jovi and Alaska Riggins. David Arnold is the New York Times bestselling author of Electric Kingdom, Mosquitoland, Kids of Appetite, and The Strange Fascinations of Noah Hypnotic. He has been optioned for film by Paramount. He has won the Southern Book Prize, the Great Lakes Book Award, and was named a Publishers Weekly Flying Start for his debut. His books have been translated into over a dozen languages. He lives in Lexington, Kentucky with his wife and son. Thank you both for joining us. I'm super excited. Have a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rose, and thanks, Literati, for having us here.
Yes.
I am so excited to celebrate Baby and Solo tonight. Woo!
I'm so excited to talk to you.
This is really, look, part of why I love this job so much is that I get to read so many books, like, for work, which my 9-year-old is like, you have the best job. And I'm like, dude, I know. So yeah, I had the pleasure of reading Baby and Solo, I want to say it was definitely last year. And, it just I remember it's funny because I got the request came through your agent and he had like talked it up quite a bit, actually. Like I remember reading the email and be like, damn, this book, it can't be this good. And I'll be a monkey's
watching, so thank you, Stephen, for that.
Yeah, no, look, if anything, he undersold it. It's so brilliant. It's just so, oh man, it sucked me right in. And it's just it's such a rare book where I feel like I'm in it for the sentences. I'm in it for the characters. I'm in it for the setting. I was in it for the reveal. And look, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I like pride myself on spotting reveals before they happen. But man, this whole book, I was like, I would think I had it figured out. And then there would be like a piece of information and I'm like, no, I definitely don't. So there was a great reveal. Anyway, this book has everything and I absolutely loved it. So huge congrats. I hope you had a wonderful pub day and I'm so excited to talk to you about it.
Oh, well, thank you. And everything you just said about my book is exactly how I feel about Electric Kingdom. So it's awesome to be able to talk to you.
Well, that's very sweet. So I want to hear about you so you're from Michigan. How long, or you live in Michigan. So yeah, where would you say you're from?
So for the first 25 years of my life, I lived in Indiana, in a smallish town. It didn't feel like a small town at the time, but now that I live in Metro Detroit, it feels like a small town. It's Elkhart, which is a couple hours east of Chicago, kind of Notre Dame country. So like small farm town with very Amish adjacent. So at like all of our stores and supermarkets, we have the hitches for the horses. And so that's what I thought my big town was until I moved to Metro Detroit.
So do you live in Detroit now? No, you don't live in
the metro area.
The metro area. Okay, great. And so have you always written, or like how did the process of you writing, I want to hear about like how long did it take you to write Baby and Solo? What brought you to this story and these characters? How long was that process? What did that look like?
Okay. So you'll probably have to like ask me parts 2 and parts 3 of that question again, because I'm definitely going to go off in the weeds. So have I always written? No. My degree is in English and I started off as a high school teacher. Then so I had one of those moments when I was teaching where actually I intercepted a bomb threat. And I just had this kind of epiphany of I don't want to do this anymore.
Oh, wait, you said you intercepted it. So you answered a phone call or what?
So it was
Or you,
on my answering machine in my
okay.
classroom. And so I had to be the one that reported it. And so everything was safe. But then once whatever group of students was responsible for that sort of realized the kind of chaos they could cause, gosh, we had the fire alarm pulled like 4 or 5 times a day. And it just, like, I loved teaching and I loved that age group, but I wasn't getting to teach. So I'm like, I'm going to take a break from that for a while. And I actually went from teaching like Shakespeare to 9th graders to teaching preschool, which was
I taught preschool too.
You did?
I was a preschool teacher. Yes.
No way.
This is great. We have to talk about that.
We
I want
do.
to hear the rest of your story.
Okay.
But I mean, I taught mainly like 4-year-olds.
Yeah.
You say teach, and I guess it is teaching, but it's like a differerent kind of teaching, really. It's like how to be a human.
Early childhood educators are so underpaid
Absolutely.
and undervalued, and it's not even funny. So, oh my gosh, I bet you were an amazing preschool teacher.
It was fun. Cool. Like, it was really, I had a great time. It was a really, yeah. That was also during the period of me. I was also in this was when we lived in Nashville and I was in bands. So I was like, what do I like to do? Because I was there to be a rock god. It didn't happen, but that's why I was there. And I was like, I didn't want to be miserable in my job, it sounds like you can relate. And I was like, what do I like to do? I was like, I like hanging out with kids. And yeah, I was a preschool teacher for like 4 years. That's crazy.
That's awesome.
Okay. Wow. So you went into early childhood education.
I did. And then, so while I was doing that, I thought I wanted to take a stab at writing a book. And so I got this idea for a story, and at the time I got the idea, like, this is one of my favorite things to talk about, but my husband was in Switzerland, and we were just chatting online, and I told him, like, I had this idea for a book, but I think it would be really time consuming. At the time I had a 4-year-old and a 1.5-year-old, and I was teaching, and I had a job as a photographer. And so it was very busy. And I'm like, I just really feel like I need to write this book. And I told him what it was. And his answer back to me, and like, I should have just like printed out the screen, but it just said, I'll do whatever it takes for you to do this.
Aw, see, now if we were in a bookstore right now, there would be like a chorus of, aw, that's so sweet.
But anyone who knows my husband, which he doesn't like, he's not a very outgoing person. So even if people know him, they don't know him. But if you're lucky enough to know him, you like, that is exactly him. So I wrote that book. And when I was looking to shop it around, the feedback I was getting was that this is so weird. It was too religious to be published traditionally and too secular to be published religiously. I don't know. Those are things, I guess. Those are things. Yeah. And so I'm like, you know what? Like, this story means a lot to me, so I'm just going to do it myself. And I did, and I had a fantastic experience, and I had like a lot of support from my readership, and it was great. And so when I thought about writing a second book, I thought, I think I'm gonna go for it again. Only I think I'm going to try and get it traditionally published. And so I had a lot of ideas, but the idea that I just kept getting like pulled back into was a platonic love story between a boy and a girl. But the way that I write is like, I think I have like all of these like piles of things that interest me. And I just kind of like throw them in the air and see how they can go together. And sometimes pieces of that like falls away and doesn't end up in the final product, but I'm always like surprised at what actually can fit together. And so like, I love the idea of the 90s for lots of reasons, which I'm we'll probably touch on in a little bit. But the idea of like, what does vulnerability mean? And what does unconditional love look like when there's not that romance element to it? And just all of these things were so intriguing to me. And then and then once I have those ideas, then I get to just discover who these characters are. And that's really what it feels like to me. Like I'm not a person who can just write an outline and be like, okay, and now I'm going to do the inciting incident. And now I'm going to do the, like I would probably write a lot faster if I could do it that way, but I can't. And so I just had these ideas and then I just let them kind of appear. So that's kind of how Baby and Solo started. And I don't remember part 2 of your question. So
I think you sort of answered it. And it's it's so funny so for those of you who don't know, Lisabeth and I don't really know each other. I mean, we're kind of getting to know each other right now. And I can relate so strongly to so many of the things you're saying, not just the preschool angle, but like telling my wife I needed to write a book and having her just be like, you got to do it. And they're just being, and then also I feel like we could talk all night about the added urgency of writing with children. And I don't mean like rushing, because urgency and how quickly you write are two separate things. But to me, at least, because I didn't really get serious about writing, and then I didn't write my first novel until we had a newborn baby, and it was just this added sort of urgency to do something, meaningful, and to do something that I really, really believed in, and then doing that over the course of a couple of years while he was there, kind of. It's just I often wonder if I ever would have written a novel if we hadn't had kids.
Right. Yep.
Anyway, so I'm very much relating to a lot of your story here. I want to talk about the 90s. I wore my flannel just for you. Yeah, this book, I've thought about it a couple of ways about how to best describe it. I feel like reading Baby and Solo is taking a warm bath in 90s nostalgia. So what I want to know is, who was the Lisabeth of the 90s? What were your obsessions? What, like, on a Friday night? I guess I'm assuming a few things here that we're of similar age, because when I think of the 90s, I think of my high school years. Is that true of you as well?
So I think I'm actually a little bit older than you. But when the 90s started, I was like 10, so a child. And then when the 90s ended, I was in college. So like I really did come of age that whole decade. So yeah, I was high school, like 94 to 98.
Okay.
So what was I doing on a Friday night then?
Yeah, like where were you on a Friday night in high school in the 90s? Wearing flannel and a chain wallet, like in a parking lot somewhere, or what?
I was working at a video store.
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad that was your answer. I wasn't going to go there, but I'm so glad.
Yeah.
Oh man, that makes me so happy. Did you have a nickname?
I did have a nickname, but not in the way that, so for those of you who haven't read Baby and Solo yet, the names Baby and Solo are their work names. In order to work at Royo Video, you have to go by a character's name from a movie.
Actually, you know what? That's a good point. This is how unprofessional we are, guys. Maybe you should tell people what your book is about, just quickly, right? Because maybe I would assume there's some people here who haven't read it. So, like, just a quick kind of rundown about what your book is about.
Okay, so trying to just remember what's on, because I don't want to give any spoilers at all. So the story is from the perspective of 17-year-old Joel Teague, who has spent the last 7 years of his life in and out of mental health care facilities, trying to kind of come to grips with a trauma that his family endured when he was a young child. And so he gets this prescription from his latest therapist, who says, like, I think it's time for you to get back out there. And one way you could do that would be by getting a part-time job with kids your own age. And so through some family connection, he gets this job at a video rental store called Royo Video, which is like an independent kind of video store that's in downtown Royal Oak, Michigan. And that's where he meets this kind of cast of characters who are all a little bit like misfits, including Baby. So most of the characters, you don't even get to know their actual names. So, so that's how they get their names. My video store was a little bit different because it was inside of a pharmacy. So I think there was a point in the 80s and 90s where like everything had a video store in it. Like your gas station, you could get videos from. So I worked in this pharmacy that had different departments. So there was like a grocery department and like a giftware department and a magazine department. And then we had a video department. And I started working there when I want to say that I was either almost 16 or it was probably right around turning 16. And I worked there off and on until I was 22. So
wow.
Which is like really long time in teen years to work somewhere. So the reputation that I got working at that store was that I have a little bit of a photographic memory, and the system of how videos were rented out with their like their organizational system was like, it had to do with tags and numbers and associations. And then customers were also assigned like account numbers. And for some reason, I had like the majority of them memorized. So the majority of the numbers in the store were memorized for the videos. And so when it came time to like put things away, like I was pretty quick. And so for some reason, this landed me with the nickname Video Queen.
I thought you were going to say Rain Man.
Oh, nope. That would have been a good one though. So it's like, and that's where I feel like I got cheated a little bit, because I feel like I should have had a name that had to do with movies. But like when I go back to my hometown and if I ever run into anybody who I used to work with, they still call me the Video Queen. So it's a name that has stuck for a long time.
Are you happy when someone calls you that, or are you just like furious?
I'm not. I mean, I can't be furious because this was such a. I mean, I worked in a video store. It was awesome.
Right.
So I like to be reminded of it.
The Video Queen. Okay. Well, if I ever meet you in person, which hopefully someday, I'm going to call you the Video Queen.
Great.
Yeah. Well, that kind of segues nicely into the next question that I had, which was there are some books and really movies and just stories in general where I feel like storytelling is sort of like the secret weapon. And so like when I think about, for example, how much I love Gilmore Girls, it's not even Gilmore Girls that I love, which I do, but when I think about why, it really is Stars Hollow. Like I want to go be in Stars Hollow. And really the same is true for Lord of the Rings. Like I just want to live in Middle Earth. So as I was reading this, that was one of the components of it that I loved so much, was just how Royo Video is very much a character. It's a really like kind of a breathing organism. And I felt like the characters all kind of came alive in ways that they wouldn't have outside of that place. So was that an intention? Well, I mean, clearly like the video store is such a strong component of this. Did you, and maybe this speaks more to like what you're working on now or like your next project. Do you think about setting as in that way? Like, okay, I really need a strong setting. Or did it just kind of happen that you really wanted to write a video store story, especially if I didn't know you'd worked there for so many years, but how much do you think about setting when you're writing, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, absolutely for Baby and Solo, like I went into it with the setting will be a character. Oh my gosh, I drew so many schematics of this store to the, like, this isn't based off of my video store. I mean, I wish it was, because I like Royo Video is like a place I want to go. But I just created it. I drew every nook and cranny so that I had visuals. I had like the fire exits. Like I knew how to get out of the store if there was a fire. Like that's how much time I spent just visualizing this place. I went to downtown Royal Oak and took pictures of the buildings that I imagined it would be so that it could feel even more real to me in terms of like, well, this is where I would go if I was going to Royal. So, and really I think my biggest inspiration looking back on that, like my favorite movie where setting is a character, is Empire Records. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. So but instead of it being a video store, it's a record store. But I love that movie because like all of those characters who are in there, they would not hang out if they didn't work together. They're each their own separate story. And I would love to like read a book about each of their stories. But when they come together in that music store, like they have a shared purpose, shared goal. And like I feel like we live in a time where you don't have to be around people who aren't like you anymore. You can very much just build your own world full of the people you want in it, and you're not forced out of that very much. Gosh, I remember going to jury duty and just feeling like it was, oh my gosh, I just met all these really interesting people, and I don't have that opportunity anymore because I don't go to the workplace. I work at home, and so I loved that about Empire Records, and I'm like, I want to create a space like that for the story that I'm writing. So that was, yeah. So it was intentional to create Royo in that way.
I love that. And it also, two things came to mind. The first was when you mentioned Empire Records, I thought of another classic record store movie, which is High Fidelity, which
Yeah.
I've seen. It's like one of those movies that I've seen many, many, many times.
Yeah.
And there's just something so comforting about it. It feels
Right.
kind of, and I don't know if that speaks to the fact that I've spent a lot of time in record stores or like the late 90s, early 2000s feeling of like the young adulthood where I don't know what that is, but like I want to go back there.
Right.
And I very much got that same vibe in your book.
And I think part of that, and I've like in thinking about like, why does it feel that way? I feel like because that's lost now. Like we don't have, the 90s was the last time where we had this shared mainstream culture, because once the internet came, everything splintered off into more like niche. And so there isn't a place where teenagers today all go work. And we've had that since about like the 1950s with malt shops. And then we had record stores, we had arcades, we had drive-ins, we had the mall, we had video stores, and all of those things are kind of gone. So there's not that place anymore where the youths go to be together. And I miss that. I want that for my kids.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's funny because I'm listening right now to an oral history of The Office, a podcast that is like, and they're talking about why it's so popular now, and especially popular among kids, not just teenagers, but like 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds. And one of the theories is that these places like The Office, they don't exist anymore. Like the kind of mundane, we all come and gather in this place, and we're, like you said, we're all here to do a certain thing with these certain people. And there is like a real draw to that because it's such a thing that's lacking now. Yeah. That's really interesting. Well, so I've recently kind of had this thought about, like as sometimes you have a thought that you're not able to articulate until you say it out loud. So I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and we were talking about the things that we think about the most while we're writing. Okay. And I realized one of the things that I hadn't really been able to pinpoint until that moment was, it's not just that reading affects writing. It's that while you're reading, you're subconsciously coming up with a hierarchy of values, things that draw you to certain books. So for example, I am drawn to books that are very ambitious. I'm also drawn to books that focus a lot on the sentence level, like the prose of a book. So I can forgive books that are a little slower or that the pacing isn't quite perfect if I feel like the author is like on top of their game or really swinging for the fences. Or so I think we all sort of have this hierarchy of values in our reading that then we sort of subconsciously apply while we're writing, whether we mean to or not. So this is still just sort of a newfound kind of like idea of mine, which I may not be articulating very well. But do you have any, off the top of your head, do you have any hierarchy of values while you're reading that you think, these are the things that I love in the books that I read that I definitely want to apply in the books that I write?
I think the thing that resonates most to me with what you just said would be like if the character is somebody I want to know, so not even necessarily someone who I agree with everything they say or do, but just if they're written like so well that I feel like I want to know them, that they are an actual person who exists, then I'm in for 10,000 pages. Like I want to spend a lot of time with the characters who I can connect with the most. Like as much as I talk about movies, I'm definitely more of a TV person, and that's because of that. It's because you get to be with the characters longer, and I think maybe that does seep into my writing just because of how like long the books that I tend to write. They tend to be very long. And my favorite YA book is Prep by Curtis Sittenfeld. And I don't know if you've read that, but it's a YA novel that is about 145,000 words, wow, which is really long for a YA novel. I think the standard is somewhere around like 75,000 to 90. So like when I turned in my first draft of Baby and Solo, it was 141,000 words. Oh. And my agent's like, hey, that's great. We're going to get it down to 100,000. And I'm like, that's like cutting every third word. How in the world am I supposed to do that? So it is not, it's not 100,000 words.
How long is it? How long is it?
It's 100, I think it's 111, which is that's still really long
for YA. Yeah.
I mean, I hope it doesn't feel long, but it's a big book. But yeah, so somewhere out there is a director's cut of 140,000 words for Baby and Solo. But yeah, I do think that I just want to spend a lot of time with characters. That's what means the most to me.
Yeah, and I think that's part of why I love that answer. And I think that's part of why TV has become such compelling storytelling. It's almost like it was this untapped medium for years, because TV was constantly sort of seen as like, oh, we're not going to do TV. Like actors wouldn't do TV. And I don't know if you could pinpoint. I mean, obviously, I read a book about how Seinfeld basically allowed Sopranos to happen. There was like a direct correlation between Seinfeld and The Sopranos, which I found fascinating.
Was that the David B. and Cooley book?
It was called Seinfeldia. Is that who wrote it?
No.
Well, I need to know what book you're talking about because I'm fascinated by this.
Send you a link.
But I mean, I know The Sopranos is sort of seen as like that was the one that really broke through in terms of people saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe you can do this with television." And I'm right there with you. I feel like in terms of, I mean, there are still great movies without a doubt, but 2 hours next to 10 hours, I mean, the amount of character development and storytelling and just like setting, like living in the setting, you can't really get that in a 2-hour movie, or it's a lot harder anyway. Yeah. So that then sort of, I guess, segues into what I want to talk about next, which is process, like what your writing process is. And I guess we could start by saying, given the fact that your last answer was about characters and compelling characters and living with characters being sort of like your, if not your number one, then somewhere up there at the top of your values, like what do you do to create such, because the characters in Baby Solo, they absolutely exist. Like there's no doubt in my mind that they're real. How do you do that? and is there part of your process that allows you to really inject that kind of life into your characters?
I feel like it takes me forever to write anything because of this, because I really want to know the characters before and their motivations before I can even draft anything. So like I take a lot of like notes. I'll write a lot of character sketches. I spend a lot of time on the, is it like the Social Security website where you can find out like baby names and where they're ranked in history as
that's amazing.
And baby name meanings. And like, that's all really fascinating to me. And because even the name of a character can shape who they are. And I have like moments of discovery along the way where I'm like, okay, well, I don't know what this character, like what happened to them in third grade, but let's just say something happened to them in third grade. And then like 10 pages of notes later, it will occur to me what happened to them in third grade that made them X, Y, and Z. And I love that discovery, like those moments of like, oh, I didn't know that. And I'm like, well, of course I didn't know that because I made it up. But also like it just feels like I'm picking these things out of the air that already exist. I think my process was like I connected the most to the writing process as the way it was described in the book Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. Have you read that?
I haven't. I'm aware of it. But no, I haven't read it.
So it's all about creativity. And I finally felt like someone had figured out how I'm creative and wrote it down on a piece of paper.
Oh, cool.
And so it is all about discovery. Like I cannot force a story or I'll hate it. I will be so bored. It'll be so obvious in the writing that I was not into it. Unless there's that element of like, oh, wow, this happened.
The surprise and the revelation. Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. And I've had to find, I don't know, so are you working on a next book?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I don't know. I'll be curious to talk to you like 3 books down the line and see well, mainly because like I would have sworn after my first book, like I'll never outline. I can't outline.
Mm-hmm.
And then I tried outlining and it didn't really work very well, but then that led to like this other weird sort of hybrid outline thing. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, like, but I do wonder about the people who do a detailed outline,
mm-hmm.
and then how far into it do they get before they have to toss it and start over, or
right.
do they actually like because it's I don't understand, because I'll get 3 pages down the line and everything's changed.
Yep.
So yeah, it is. Yeah, it does feel like a big mystery every time I finish a thing. You think, well, that's done, and then one of the questions inevitably is, well, what's next? Mm-hmm. And it's like, though there is no next. I just finished it. That's it. It's done. Like, now I'm just totally rambling. But I want to ask another question about process. But before I do, I actually also want to mention, so there's a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. So if our participants have any questions for Lisabeth about writing or about Baby and Solo, please do type those into the Q&A section, and we'll get to those here in not too long. So, okay, so you said you have kids, mm-hmm. and so is writing your main job? Mm-hmm. And what does like a day-to-day look like for you?
I mean, pre-pandemic, I'd have a different answer for you. But yeah, now this is what I do full time. I left teaching in 2016. So I've been doing this and all of the other things moms do since then, including heading up book fair for a couple of years, or co-heading up book fair for a couple of years, which if no one else has done that, you should do it because it's awesome. So yeah. So a typical day, aside from just the normal mom things, I try to write between 3 and 4 hours a day. And I say try to write because a lot of writing for me is just thinking. So it looks and sometimes feels like I'm not doing anything. I'm actually doing a lot of thinking. And sometimes I'll have like really like fruitful writing days where I'll do 2,000 words. But the majority of my writing days are, I wrote 300 words, but I deleted 200 of them. So that's another thing I put a lot of pressure on myself to work well and quickly. And those two things don't go hand in hand very often. And even if I write something well, I inevitably end up rewriting it 100 times before it's actually done. And if I would have known that this is what writing was, if someone would have told me, yes, you write a book and then you rewrite it 800 times and then it's done, I probably would have been like, no, thank you.
Right.
But
yeah, whenever people ask if I read my own books, I'm like, yeah, I read it 1,000 times before it became a book. I'm not reading it again.
And then never again.
Right. Yeah. I'm gonna ask. I have a couple more questions here, but I also don't want to miss any. So let me ask this one more, and then we'll do some reader questions.
Okay.
So like, it's very frequent that readers conflate the author with the characters in their book. So there's a great example of this. One of my favorite books is The World According to Garp by John Irving. And in the there's like an author's note at the end of that book where he has to explain something, which is, this isn't a huge spoiler. In the book, a child dies, and it's terrible and it's tragic and it's just the worst. But he was receiving a number of letters from parents saying, I've lost a child too. And he was like, I just have to clear up that I've never lost a kid, that fiction is storytelling, and we try to put ourselves into it and be as empathetic as possible and tell as compelling a story as we can, but that doesn't mean that everything on the page is me. So I guess my question for you, like, Joel goes through a lot in this book, and that's not you. This isn't a memoir. But how do you draw the line between fact and fiction, or like, how do you kind of juggle those personal stories with the narrative of fiction?
Yeah, so I've thought about this a lot. And I feel like, especially recently, that people who write memoirs are often like asked to prove it, like, prove this really happened to you. And people who write fiction are like asked, prove this didn't happen to you, like, prove this isn't what's going on with you. That's actually one of the reasons that I chose to write from the male perspective, is so there was right out of the gate a little bit of distance between, like the writer and the narrator. And I mean, I'm a human, and, Joel went through a lot of tragedies in his life. I've gone through tragedies in my life. If you Venn diagrammed my life with the lives of the characters in the books, there would certainly be overlap with several of them. But for me to confirm or deny any part of it, I feel like takes the experience away from the reader. If for me to say, oh, this one part, totally made that up. What if that was the one part that the reader connected with the most, and me saying that I made it up somehow cheapens that for them? That's not fair. That's not fair for me to do to them. But I also understand where those questions come from. I, like, as a reader, like, I'm longing for that connection with the writer. Like, if I find something in a story that just really tugs at my heart, and I'm like, I relate to this, like, I want to think that they somehow do too. And that's how they were able to speak to my heart, is because that what they're writing about is also something that they've gone through. So, like, I really appreciate it when people ask those questions, even if it's not the right thing to do for me to answer them. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think that is the perfect answer, actually. And I think that I love that you're, I think too, there's such an expectation, whether it's social media or whatever, of, just the like natural access that readers have to authors that wasn't there before. And now and it's one thing for a reader to reach out with a question that maybe you're not comfortable answering. But it's the sense of entitlement sometimes that comes with that. Like, what's wrong with you? You're an author and you're not going to answer my question. So I think it's just incredibly healthy and wise of you to sort of draw lines in the sand. And like you said, you're answering a lot of those questions is going to rob readers of the true experience of reading Baby and Solo. And, that's a detriment to them. Like, you're doing them a favor. You're saying this is going to be a fuller, richer experience without me telling you what's real and what's not, or what happened and what didn't. I love that answer, and I think it's exactly the right one. So well done.
I mean, the flip side to that also is that, and not just speaking for myself, but all writers are entitled to their own privacy. Like, like all humans are. Right. So yeah, what you said about entitlement, like, that made me think of that. Like, well, no, no one's entitled to anyone's life. Like
Exactly.
you earn someone's story by your relationship with them. Like no one's entitled to anyone's story, you know? So yeah,
I totally agree.
I get that too.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think that's the perfect answer. And it's not to discourage readers from asking their favorite authors questions,
Yeah.
but certainly doing it in such a way that doesn't, break boundaries or put any sense of pressure on the author to answer the question that you've asked. So we do have questions here. So I'm going to invite Rose back to kind of moderate some of those audience questions. Hey, Rose.
Thank you both of you for such a wonderful conversation. It's so amazing to see the behind the scenes of all of this kind of stuff and to hear the way that you guys are doing this. I love it. We've got quite a few questions, so I will start at the beginning. What other character in Baby and Solo would you most want to write a book about?
The Godfather.
Yes.
For those of you who haven't read yet, I won't spoil anything about her. She's the Godfather. But I am endlessly fascinated by her. And I will say, I can divulge this, that of all the characters in Baby and Solo, she's actually inspired by a real person. So I had a student in one of my years teaching high school, and he was male, but he dressed every day as though he were part of the mafia. And I don't know if he wasn't like, I don't know if it was an act, and he was like so serious about it. And I'm like, oh man, this has to be a character in a book someday. So yeah, I definitely, she needs a spinoff.
All of her lines are gold, by the way. I loved that character. So good.
She was fun to write.
How many stories do you feel like you have left to tell?
I don't know. I try to do one at a time. I definitely have, I'm endlessly curious about a lot of things. So I think if you have a little bit of creativity and curiosity, you will never run out of stories to tell. So yeah, if I knew the answer to that, I would be so sad. Be like, oh, I only have 3 stories left to tell. Like, yep. I hope I'm telling stories for the rest of my life.
Megan gives a shout out from your gal pals watching together.
Oh, hi.
What do you find most challenging in the process?
How long everything takes. So I was telling a friend who was asking, what's it like to get something published? And I said, well, it's mostly waiting. You write and then you wait, and then you write some more, and then you wait, and then you wait some more, and then you wait some more. So yeah, I sold this novel in February of 2019. So, and here we are 2 years later. So you just have to have a lot of patience, not only with yourself in the writing process, but also just with the publication process.
What was the most difficult chapter to write?
I was just asked this for something else, and I was trying to answer it in a way that didn't spoil anything. And so it's chapter 37. So that's all. And I will say that chapter 37, I wrote well over 100 times. David's looking it up right now.
I'm looking it up right now.
It takes place in Virginia, if that helps anyone.
It does help.
Okay.
That's amazing to hear you wrote it over 100 times. So it sounds like
amazing or maddening, frustrating. There's a lot of, and it was just really tricky to write and also heart-wrenching. So yeah.
What is your favorite 90s movie?
Jeez. Oh, I'm going to steal a line from Baby and say, how can you pick just one favorite movie? I obviously love Empire Records. Is a great movie, but I also really like Reality Bites. That Thing You Do, I think, is a fascinating, it's such a cool movie.
Was that technically in the 90s? You would know.
Yeah, that was 96.
Okay.
Yep.
Was it?
Wow. Yeah. Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet, which actually has a scene in Baby and Solo, I think is just art. So good. Gosh, I'm gonna kick myself later when I realize like I didn't say this one or this one or this one, but yeah, those are some of my favorites.
This one might have a little bit of reflection from the earlier one, but what was the best and hardest part of writing this book?
I mean, the best is always the hardest, right? So I don't know if I would call it the reveal, because the point of this book is not the reveal. But I think the hardest part was dealing with my own vulnerability in writing Baby and Solo's their struggle with their vulnerability.
Do you have a best part? Or does that, like you said,
I think it's, yeah, the hardest is the best.
Sure.
Yeah.
Beautiful. David is wearing his 90s flannel. Is there significance to your t-shirt and pin tonight?
So yes. So my shirt says nostalgic, which, I mean, I don't need to explain that. It's pretty straightforward. So this pin, I don't know if you can see it. So on my Instagram, my author Instagram, in the lead up to the release of Baby and Solo, I was doing a March Madness countdown for the 90s movies. And I said I would wear something to honor the winner of that. So everyone was voting on these different brackets and we got down to the winner. So any guesses what movie this was?
Is it Clueless?
Clueless.
Yes!
Wait, so how many did you just buy afterward, after the winner won, or did you buy a bunch and then you just had to wear whichever one won?
I mean, so we're pretending that I don't already have like a ton of these.
Okay, right. You just open your drawer and you're like, okay, this one. Yeah.
Pretty much. That's kind of how it went. I also was pretty sure of who the top four were going to be. And so I'm like, well, I already have plenty of things I can wear for any of these movies.
Yeah, hang on. I want to ask you a question too. Did you see look, we're old, guys. We're old. Years ago, The Onion did a video about the last blockbuster as a joke. And they presented it like a documentary of the last blockbuster, as if it were this thing that was totally gone. And I remember watching it with my friends and being like, this is hilarious. There's ever going to be a time where there's no blockbuster. And now there's actual documentaries about Blockbuster being gone.
Yes, I've watched every documentary that there are about video stores, especially that one. And the manager at that store, her name is Sandy. And I wrote her a letter and sent her my book last week.
Oh, that's amazing. You have to let us know.
She's such a cool lady. So in the off chance that you're watching, Sandy, I hope you like my book.
Oh, I love that. That's so great.
What came first, the title or opening line?
I think the opening line. Actually, no, that's wrong. I lied. I wrote down the title of this book, which is not the title that it actually is. I wrote it down long before they had the opening line. But the original title was actually Baby and Solo circa 1996. I liked having that timestamp on it, but for lots of reasons, it got shortened. And I mean, I still love the title, but yeah. So I did have that title first because that encompassed everything that I was, aiming for, was these two kids in 1996.
I like that. It's kind of like the chicken and the egg question. Where are your parakeets?
So my parakeets are downstairs in the basement so that they don't interrupt us. I don't have the cool kind of parakeets that you can take out of the cages. I have the kind of parakeets that if you go near them, they would rather fly into the wall until they are no longer alive. Then they don't like people. So we just give them some distance. But I will say that Tiki Bon Jovi was named through the course of me writing this book because they're there is the presence of a lot of Bon Jovi music in this book. And I will say, like, that wasn't a goal. Like, I wasn't really a Bon Jovi fan. That's something else I love too, is that, like, the same for the REM album Monster. Like, these weren't things that I'm like, oh, these are my favorite things and I'm going to write a book and shove them in there. They just kind of naturally, like, became part of the book. And then I fell in love with them. So, like, now I really love Bon Jovi. And that guy is so cool. Like, he owns his own soup kitchen and works in it. Like John Bon Jovi.
I didn't know that.
Yes, he is the nicest guy. Like, I stalk him on social media all the time now. And like, everything that comes out of his mouth, everything that he does, it's all so genuine and sincere. So I'm really glad that for some reason he ended up, like, his music ended up in my story, because it opened this, like, world of Bon Jovi for me. And the same is true for Monster. Like, I've always liked that album. I've always liked REM, but now, like, anytime I hear the song "What's the Frequency, Kenneth," like, I feel like it's the universe giving me a hug. Like, this is your song, like, and I love it. And I wouldn't have that if I didn't have Baby and Solo. So
I have to tell you, that record Monster for me was one of those angsty teenage albums that I went back to, or that I think, yeah, I know I had it on CD, and I would just go back to it and play it over and over again. So, like, every time they talked about it, I was put right back in that place. It was so good. Yeah, I love that.
This next question is actually perfect. It's, what is your favorite song mentioned in the book?
Oh, jeez. I mean, well, how do you pick just one favorite song? So what I'll say instead is that my favorite placement of a song in the book is a conversation between Joel and Scarlet, or Solo and Scarlet. And I'm not going to count this as a spoiler because it's not really, but he always gives her, like, these random lines of advice that he steals from somewhere. They're not from him, but they just pop into his mind because he's seen them other places. And she is in a position where she wants to do that for him, but she's not real sharp. And so she just looks at him and she goes, "Don't chase waterfalls." And, like, originally I had her actually quote the song, but then I found out, like, that's really expensive to do if you're going to actually use a song in a book. So I had to paraphrase it. But I just love the idea of someone thinking, I need to give you some sage old advice. So I'm going to quote you a TLC song. Don't go chasing waterfalls. So
Perfect.
That's my favorite song placement in the book.
I love that. That's perfect. How did you decide when the book was finished? Were you tempted to keep rewriting things?
I don't know if Kaylin's watching, my editor, but she would be like, the deadline came. That's how we decided. No, I don't know. You just kind of, you know what's right, and you know what you have to let go. And especially with chapter 37, I had a lot of peace about knowing that I'm never going to be satisfied with this chapter, because I'm not satisfied that this is something that can happen. And that's how I made my peace with it. And I think that you can probably say that for, like, the majority of things. Like, you either know, or you know that it's the reason that it doesn't feel right is a good reason, is because the thing that's happening shouldn't really happen in real life, but it does. So.
Lady Sarah says, "Hey, old friend, have your kids read it yet? I'm so excited to read your book. It will arrive soon."
Hello, Sarah. My kids, no, they have not read it yet. My older daughter is 14, and I give her permission to read it, but I don't know that she's ready yet. And I kind of trust her to make that call when she's ready. Though I'm thinking some of her friends are going to read it and they're going to be like, your mom did this. So that might be weird for her. Yeah, when she's ready, she can read it.
A question for Lisabeth and David. In addition to David's cool flannel shirt, is there anything out of your 90s looks that you'd willingly wear style today? Hoping a cool 90s haircut is involved.
Oh, David, what are you going to wear?
Well, so it's funny you should ask. So because of pandemic, I've just let my hair grow, and I've been doing a man bun for like 6 months now. And then last week, I'm fully vaccinated and felt comfortable going to like a hair salon for the first time in 14 months. So I got my hair cut, but I still kind of have. I'm gonna have to take my headphones off. Like the shave under. I don't know
Uh-huh.
if and I had that in the 90s. I would shave my head all the way up to the top and then let my hair go. So I still, I kind of have a 90s haircut right now.
Yeah. And that's very Joel before Scarlett gets a hold of him with her scissors.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I went the extra mile. I got the flannel and the shave under, and I'm here for your book.
That's awesome. I'd like to take full responsibility for any 90s stuff that happens from now on. And it has nothing to do with Stranger Things for sure. It's not them. It's all Baby and Solo. Oh my gosh, the fashion trend I never had a pair of Doc Martens, and I so want a pair of Doc Martens. I would wear them with everything. So that's what I would pick.
What advice do you have for young girls interested in writing a book?
I mean, for anyone interested in writing a book, I would say just trust your gut and do it. Every person's journey with a book is completely unique. There's not some corporate way to make this happen. There's luck, and there's chance, and there's timing, and there's a million other factors that come into play. But don't let that stop you from doing it. Just write your story and trust the people around you to give you advice and take their advice. And then believe in yourself to give it a try, like to pursue an agent for sure. And then just don't give up.
Do you remember the tag ID for Titanic in your video store?
Okay, so that was 1997. I'm thinking, okay, so that came onto video when I had gone away for my first semester of college. So I don't remember that one. I do remember that it was a double VHS cassette though, because it didn't fit on our shelves. Because when I came back to work for Christmas, it was there. But I can tell you, Clueless was 4769, Waterworld was 4788. Some of them are still lodged in my memory forever. The guy who I ordered pizza from, his number, his employee, or his card holder number was 5550. I don't know why I remember that, but I do.
Wait, was Good Will Hunting in your tournament, in your March Madness?
No. You need to go to my highlights on my Instagram and you can watch it all over again.
Okay.
Because it started out with categories, and that one didn't fit into one of the categories.
Gotcha.
I did get a lot of flack for this, for several movies that didn't make the top 16. So sorry about that.
Somebody said that they're so bitter that Singles lost. Just thought you should know.
I know who that is. Hello, Joe. Thanks for tuning in. I'm really sorry Singles didn't make it. It's a fantastic film, and Eddie Vedder's in it, and Chris Cornell is in it, and that's amazing in and of itself. So if you haven't watched Singles, you should definitely watch that. And then become friends with Joe Pop on the internet, because he loves to talk about Singles.
That was all on my end. Do either of you have any closing remarks right before we finish up?
Everybody should buy Baby and Solo from Literati. You should do that right now. I think there's a link down there somewhere.
Yes, and I will send it again.
Yeah.
I did sign copies. So all the copies that are at Literati are signed copies. And I did put a secret thing inside each of the ones that I signed. So if you end up with one of those, you'll get a secret thing. I wanted to say, thank you, Literati. Your store is amazing. I want to live there. And I'm so excited that you're opening again soon to be in person. I can't wait for that. Thank you to David, because this is a dream come true. I can't believe I actually got to talk to you, and that you read any words that I wrote. That's kind of amazing.
I'm gonna read them all now.
So yeah, and I'm super grateful for my agent, Stephen Barr, who might or might not be on here still, at Writer's House, and to Kaylin at Candlewick, and just, I'm the luckiest.
Thank you both for such a wonderful conversation tonight. I learned so much, both in the plot of the story and also just about both of you. And it was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Have a good evening, everybody. Thank you for
Bye,
joining.
everyone.
Bye.
Congrats, Lisabeth.
Bye.